trying to look on our coast and see if we have any.
It's my privilege to introduce Tim Clifton to everyone and everyone who watches the recording tomorrow or whenever. A little bit about Tim. He began photography in high school and learned to work in the darkroom. He then took a break for about 15 years until he took up underwater photography. Tim did that for about 15 years until he had to take another break due to a house fire and a back injury. Then in the year 2000, Tim went back to photography, this time taking photographs above water. He thought it would be easier than underwater photography. This too presented its challenges. Oh, sorry, I guess I turned off my video. So Tim found, realizing these challenges, he found that reading, attending workshops, and joining a local photography club helped him to improve and to create images he hoped would convey the emotion of his experiences. So you probably already heard Tim lives near Tacoma, Washington. That right, Tim?
Yes, I'm in between Tacoma and Seattle, about 20 miles south of Seattle and about 5 to 10 miles north of Tacoma.
Nice. Okay, well, please take it away, Tim.
Okay, let me see if I can. And first thing I'm going to do is ask for your patience, because this is my first presentation for Zoom. So let's see. Can you see my screen as I have it on now?
Yes.
Okay, what I'm going to try and do is let me bring up and see if you can see. Do you see my website now?
No.
No, let me go
Well,
ahead.
if you switch windows, you'll have to switch windows. You'll have to share. In other words, stop sharing one and then share the other.
Right. Are you able to see it now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Perfect. Perfect.
Okay. So first of all, I'd like to thank you very much for the opportunity to present. I'm honored that a club, views my work and is interested in some of the things that I do. So I do want to thank you, and I will ask for a little bit of your patience, seeing how this is the first time I've ever done this. I have tried to practice, so I'm not an embarrassment to myself or the people who said, let's try to bring him on. So any patience is greatly appreciated. I do much better behind the camera than in front. And I used to present, but it was in-person presenting and not necessarily through Zoom. So I'm kind of like the old dog who didn't want to learn new tricks. So you can see and if you have any questions throughout this, my preference is that you just kind of shout it out or just interrupt, because certain times if you wait and you forget, and then I don't get a chance to address it. So please feel free to interrupt. I don't think of it as an interruption if you say, hey, what about this or what about that? So please feel free to do that. It won't bother me at all. So this is my website, and I have galleries, and you can come down. If you can see the second gallery down, can you see the wave gallery? And so this is where most of my wave images are. And so you can scroll through and see the different ones that I've done. I will be adding a few more that I got from this last couple of trips. So then the main thing I wanted to try and go over is if you come up and look at the blog, can everybody see the menu with the blog on it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So you were asking about planning and when's the best time to go and how you determine. So what I've tried to do, because of the number of people that have asked how I photograph the waves, is I finally sat down and created a blog so that I can steer people towards this, and it will hopefully answer as many questions as possible about planning and photographing the waves. Now, bear in mind, when I'm talking waves, for me, I try to concentrate on what I call wave collisions or reflected waves. And they're not the normal wave that comes breaking in onto the shoreline like surfers would do. What I try to do is where we're located and where I photograph, there is a large cliff and the bottom topography is such that a wave will come in, and they come in sets when they're large. All waves come in a certain number of sets. But on the big waves, you'll have the first couple in a set that will come in and crash into the cliff. Well, they can't go forward. So that water, after it crashes onto the cliff, can only go backward. And so then it starts to recede back out to the ocean. And with the topography of the bottom and the time of the tide and the type of waves, it will meet an incoming swell. And depending on the duration between the waves, you get what I call wave collisions or reflected waves. So it's actually the outgoing water that collides with the new incoming wave. So the best times that I have found is you want to plan, and the first thing you want to do is find a area where a website where you can find the forecast for the wave and tide and wind conditions and the direction of the waves. And so as you can see, I have 3 of them here. One is Magic Seaweed. Another one is myforecast.bin marine. And then you also have Wavefinder, and you should be able to click on these or copy them. And you should be able to then put in a search for Cape Disappointment. Now, one of the things, if you're really into it, as I have gotten into it, I subscribed to Magic Seaweed and paid a fee for a year. The reason I do it is it allows me to search 16 days in advance. And I can also go back in history for X number of years. And if I have images that I'm trying to figure out what the wave heights were, what the tide was, what the wave direction was, which is all pertinent to doing this, it allows you to go back and do research. And that way you can look at your look at the time and then reinforce or reconfirm what it is. So you can scroll down, you can read this. I'm not going to bother you and read it, but this is the area where we photograph. And this is Cape Disappointment State Park. And it's a fairly good sized park. And what you want to do is go to the north, find it when you get in there, and you'll see signs at the booth. They'll be able to direct you to the parking lot of the North Jetty. So if you can see my cursor here, this is the parking lot. And as you come here this direction out of screen, this is going out to the ocean, and that's the North Jetty. You have a beach called Waikiki Beach, and then you have a parking lot that is right here. And off into this southeast direction is the Cape Disappointment Lighthouse. There's a large cliff, and there's a lighthouse on top of it. And so this is all cliff lines and cliffs a couple hundred feet tall that are running along through here to where the lighthouse is. You see a small fin of rock that sticks out this way, and this is the general area that I like to photograph. And the waves will come in this way and they'll hit this cliff, and then they'll come back and they'll collide. And so I've circled the general wave collision area, and you can stand or sit in this area here, and you're about 1,200 feet away. And so this, you're almost at sea level here, and you've got a lot of driftwood and things like that. And so with the distance that you are from the waves, it really gives you the feeling that you are at water level or that you're in a boat because of the geometry or, the angle that you're at. And so for this, because of the distance involved, you don't have to have a real large or a real small opening for your f-stop. You can shoot usually around 5.6 or 6.3, and which I do, especially if I'm shooting with a 100 to 400 lens. I will try to shoot at f6.3. If I have an extender on it, I'll be at f8 if I'm fully zoomed out. But it allows you, you don't have to be a high a high f-stop, and hopefully you can get enough shutter speed to freeze the waves. I normally try to shoot at about 1600th of a second. And so I will shoot usually either shutter priority or aperture priority with the shutter speed set. And then I'll let my ISO go into auto so that I don't have to worry about that. So all of that information is contained in this area through here. So I'm not going to bore you by reading all of it. I'll let you do that, and it'll let you visit the site. Some of the waves you'll see that I'm working on tonight to show you, and this will tell you the day that this was captured. You'll see the high tide was 8.72, the wave heights were 12.27, and the interval is 17 seconds. Then it also gives you the direction. So the same thing with this, you'll notice on these that the wave intervals are important, in that if this one is, you're looking at a 17-second wave interval, here you're looking at a 15.3, here you're looking at 16.7. So the wave interval is rather important, because when the waves strike this cliff, if the wave interval is too short, then the incoming wave doesn't get a chance to break farther out, and it breaks closer to shore. And you don't, for me, you don't get as much wave formations and dramatic rising or so. So usually you can try and look for wave durations that are 14 seconds or longer, and that's what I try to do. So pretty much you can go to the blog and see that, and you've got my email address. I'm happy to share my phone number. If you're going and you want to, you want some information on it, then I urge you to give me a call. So before I start, does anybody have any questions so far on anything that I've rambled on about? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Are you for hire to go take somebody out with you?
Terry, didn't we have this conversation one time about chocolate chip cookies? Or somebody had asked me about it, and I said, yeah, it's just chocolate chip cookies. If I'm going to photograph, or if somebody goes, hey, because the hard part is, it's not like you can plan like a normal workshop where you can say, oh, I'm going weeks in, I'm planning 6 months or a year in advance. If you have the opportunity to say, oh, we can go next week or something, and if I'm available, I'm happy to help someone. I'm happy to be there. If somebody wants to help, if somebody wants to pay my gas or chip together for a motel room or something, I'm happy to do that. I don't make my living running workshops at this time. And so it's not like I need the income for it. So I'm happy to help people or be part of a group if anybody's interested.
Well, Tim, I live up here. I'm living on the east side of Seattle right now. So, gee, if you happen to be heading down anytime, I'll send you my info. Shoot me something and we'll meet up.
Yeah, there's a, and I'm glad that you had mentioned that. So there's one other thing that in the planning process about talking about tides, you will see a lot of people that talk a lot about king tides. There's a king tide coming up during the weekend of, what is it, the 6th and 7th of November. I think next weekend, not this weekend, but the following weekend. And king tides occur, it's when they're the higher tides of the year, and usually anywhere from 8 to 10 feet or 8.5 to 10 feet. And everybody goes, oh, king tide, I'm going to go during king tide. King tides are really great as long as you have the waves that go with it. So if you have a 8-foot to 9-foot or 10-foot high tide and you only have 2-foot waves, well, then the king tide doesn't do too much. So it is important when you plan and you say, oh, I'm going to be there for the king tide, check to make sure that the wave heights are what you want and that the interval is there and that the high tide isn't at 3 o'clock in the morning. There's 2 high tides a day, 2 low tides a day, and usually one of the high tides is bigger than the other one. And so normally I try to time it to where the tides are somewhere between noon and 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon in the winter. If you've got a high tide or king tide at 6 o'clock in the morning, it's going to be pitch dark and you're trying to photograph these big waves. So, so there is check. You can go through that information and look for them, and just if I'm going or if you see it, send me an email or give me a call. I'll let you know if I'm going. I'm more than happy to have someone, to meet someone there.
Tim,
Yes.
Ronnie Rosenbach seems to have a question.
Okay.
I just wanted to point out that Grant Kreinberg is trying to join and he hasn't been able to.
I'm on now.
Great, thank you. Great.
And Tim, my question was about Magic Seaweed. Is it a free website or do you have to purchase Magic Seaweed Pro, and how much?
So you don't have to purchase Magic Seaweed Pro. Regular Magic Seaweed is available to you and it gives you 7 days, but it doesn't let you research the old history. So the Pro gives you 16 days out and it allows you to go back and look historically at it. Magic Seaweed is pretty much a surfing website. Windfinder is too, but Magic Seaweed is a big surfing site that people go to. And the reason I joined it is I wanted to look far enough in advance. And I also wanted to be able to research some of my waves and go back a year or two and try to confirm what the conditions were after I photographed them. So I'm kind of trying to build a spreadsheet that says, these are some of my better waves and here are the conditions, so that if somebody goes, oh, the waves are this high and the interval is this, is it worthwhile going? I can look and see from some of my other images if it makes sense to spend 7 hours driving or longer and that much time under what might be marginal conditions. Because it's a great place to visit, but 7 hours drive and maybe staying overnight to find out that the conditions aren't there.
Right.
How much is Magic Seaweed Pro?
I think it's like $10 a month or something like that.
Got it. Thank you.
You can go on and it will give you an idea. One quick thing as far as the blog, as I found out the last time that we went just over a week ago, I used to say that it was only, after an hour's after high tide that it was pretty much done and you could pack up and go. Well, I learned the last time we went that we were there 2 to 2.5 hours after high tide. So it made the day even longer, but it was well worthwhile. So it's not necessarily just an hour after high tide. Each day may change, but if you're going to go, I certainly would put as much time as you can before and after. So,
Tim,
the
can I
other
ask
thing
you a
is-
question about the facing of that area that you're talking about? You would be shooting sort of west-southwest, right?
you're going to be shooting actually somewhat east. Well, you're going to be shooting southeast somewhat. Because if you look at the way that the map was, or that the overhead view that I gave, you're kind of, it's really confusing in that particular location. You would think you're shooting south or southwest, but you're actually looking towards the lighthouse, which is kind of southeast of the parking lot.
Oh. Just throwing that out because I just saw there's an X1 class flare today. So there's going to be some Aurora Borealis that might be visible way down into Washington, maybe Oregon, maybe California. And I was trying to figure out what direction that faced if maybe somehow that could all tie together, but that.
Well, the thing that you'll find is if you're facing that area, the lighthouse, you're going to be looking almost directly across at Fort Stevens State Park and at Astoria. So you're going to have a lot of light from Astoria. That's going to give you some light pollution.
Okay, thank you.
I had thought about going there and trying to do the Milky Way with Cape Disappointment Lighthouse, but then you've got to deal with all the light pollution that's coming off of Astoria.
Okay.
So just to let you know, I have the blog that has the information on how to shoot the waves, but your group is the first group that I have ever shared how I process my waves. So a lot of information and a lot of people have seen how I plan it, but nobody other than your group has seen how I process. You can take that for what it is or what it's worth. So you kind of have a first.
Well, thank you, Tim.
I'm sorry.
I just wanted to say thank you.
Okay, well, I'll send my address for cookies, as I said.
Yeah, okay, you got it.
Tim,
So-
you may not remember, but you and I did a session long time ago
We did.
by phone.
We processed one of your
Yeah.
wave images.
It was amazing.
Yes. So Terry can tell you, yes, you are the only one that I've gone through that with. So I hope it didn't look like it worked for you because you had some amazing stuff.
Oh, you're so sweet. I have a long way to go.
Well, again, the important thing is not all waves are the same. So it's really important the conditions and where you are to be able to get the same type of conditions that give you these wave collisions. I just don't want you to be frustrated. And if you don't find anything in California, you know, Washington and Oregon are a great place to come and visit.
Well, I'm going to go on Google and I'm going to look at the coastline and see if I see anything that's kind of what you're describing.
But he's got some interesting things.
Yeah.
But what he said he now was going to talk about is how to process.
Excuse me, Grant.
Yeah.
Hi, yeah, you know, we can hear your conversation, so could you mute yourself, please?
So before I get started, the one thing I want everybody to understand, I am by no means an expert on Photoshop. I don't use Lightroom. That's nothing against Lightroom. I just used Photoshop for a long time before Lightroom came into existence. Lightroom and Camera Raw are pretty much the same engine and will do pretty much the same thing. But I like using Photoshop because I can work in layers and I can do some things that I don't know if you can do in Lightroom. Again, you can go back and forth between the two. And what I really want to stress is that for me, there is no right way or wrong way. It's not like my way, it's the way that you need to do it. I'm just trying to get across some ideas of what I try to do. And I'm sure many of you out there are probably much more accomplished in processing than I am. And so if you go, gee, I think I know a better way, that's great. I don't want anybody to, excuse me, to think that, oh, I'm trying to tell you that this is the only way to do it. If you know Photoshop, there's many, many ways to do it. You have many plugins, you have many standalone programs like On1, and Topaz has their studio. And so a lot of different ways that you can accomplish the same thing. As I said, I'm just that old dog. And once I learned that trick, you know, it works for me. And so I don't necessarily want to learn new ones at this stage. I figured learning Zoom was enough. So the other thing is you're going to see some plugins that I use in my processing. I use Topaz products pretty much on every image that I work on. So especially every wave image, you will see that I religiously use Topaz Simplify. I will also use Topaz Studio. And I started using some work and some panels and some tools that Blake Rudis of F64 Academy puts out. If you're not familiar with them, I would do a Google search or a DuckDuckGo or whatever your search engine is for Blake Rudis, R-U-D-I-S, of F64 Academy. I would subscribe to his website. He does free offerings, or he does free tutorials, usually on Friday. And many of the things that I've learned are from his free programs, and he will send out actions. And then you can also purchase some of his tools, but he has a wealth of information. And also, if you're trying to learn Photoshop, I can't urge people or suggest Kelby One Training is a great place to go as well. So I guess let me get ready to get started. If anybody has any other questions at this time before I start.
Could you spell that academy again? What was the first?
F, so it's lowercase f 64.
Okay, F
64 Academy.
64. Okay, thank you.
Can you, is it possible that you could share some of the these details with us, maybe in a PDF or something afterwards? I'm enjoying what you're saying.
That's a lot of cookies.
Maybe
Just curious.
I will do what I can. I do have PDFs. As long as I don't see these out on bathroom walls or, you know, in rest stops or something floating around. Because it is a lot of effort to go through. And for this, I did, you know, work some outlines and things like that. So I will try to get something sent off to Betsy or Bill.
I appreciate it. You've been great so far. Thank you.
Yeah.
And again, please feel free anytime to comment. I like the fact that there's voices that I can hear, because if I hear someone snoring, then I know that I'm not doing a good job. Or if they're going, oh my gosh, where did you get this guy? You know, then I need to change. So the first thing I'm going to do is work on an image that I call beauty. And my goal is to go from this to this. And so
I'm not seeing anything.
There we go.
can you see this?
Yeah,
Sure.
the image is not
Yes.
there.
You can see it now?
That's
Yes.
a raw image.
That's the raw image.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Very
Then
lovely.
this is hopefully what I can accomplish for the finished image. It's going to be that, and hopefully between these two. This is the first image that I really worked on and presented on my website. And this one kind of went viral, I guess you could say. And I went from maybe 150 friends to close to 5,000 now, just with that. And this image has won an international award with the PSA. You're part of PSA, I believe.
Yeah.
Yes,
And
we
so
are.
this, the club that I belong to, we have the interclub competition, and that one took in round 2, I think last year, the year before, it took best of show out of the PSA's Division 2. So I'm
It's
going to open
lovely.
this. I'm sorry? Okay, can everybody?
It's
see my-
lovely. I just wanted to say it's lovely. I'm going to mute myself again.
That's okay. So can everybody see the raw image?
Yes.
Okay, so the first thing that I normally will try to do is I'm going to go up and make sure that I'm in Adobe Standard. And I don't know why it keeps defaulting to color. But the first thing I'll try to do is I'm going to crop. And I normally will try to put mine in a 4:3 constraint, either vertical or horizontal. And the reason is because I do a lot of printing and utilize a 16:20 frame and finished matte. And so I will go in and usually try to print at about a 12:16 or a 15:11, so I can overlap a little bit. And so normally you'll see me, unless it's a strange condition where I'm doing a panorama, I'll normally try to put my crop into a 4:3 so I can print as a standard 12:16, or for me, 15¼ by 11¼ So then the other thing, the next thing that I'm going to do is I come in and set my white balance. I'm going to move this over here. Okay, so I normally will set my white balance, and there's a couple of ways for me to do it. I'll come over with the eyedropper, and this is set at about 5,500, and that's what I have when I worked on this previously. And I'm going to bring my tint down a little bit. And then for me, and again, it's just my way of doing it. There's going to be many different ways to do this, but one of the first things I'll do is come in, and I'm coming in and doing my lens correction for my particular lens. And so after normally setting the Adobe standard and getting my white balance, I'll usually come to optics, and I will come in and make sure that I'm clicking so that it's an automatic profile and it'll adjust. And as you can see, this is a Canon 100 to 400 that I was using. So once I have the optics set, then one of the tricks that I learned from Blake Rudis was that I will come in oftentimes, and instead of going in and changing everything here first, one of the things to do is to come in and look at your calibration. And using the calibration is a way that you can try to eke out color information from your file to get as much color as you can, because as you'll see in some of these images, that there is a lot of cloud cover. You can get some really drab light. And so you're going to see on some of those, especially the last two, where you go from a really, really flat, almost colorless raw file, and you're trying to squeeze as much information out of it as possible. And so in this particular one, I came in and I brought my shadows down to about a -6. And then you've got your red primary, and you can come in and you can move it back and forth, and you'll get minor changes in some of the colors on this. Sometimes it's really hard to see when you're looking at them from a different, on a Zoom or something. But on some of these, I'm going back over my historical data. And so I'm going to set some of these. And as you can see, you see some real subtle changes in the saturation on this. And so I'm going to set this up at 16. Whoops, not 16. No, let's do 16. And then I'm going down into the greens, and my green primary, the hue, I'm going to bring up to about 12, 13. Saturation, I'm going to be at about 12, and you'll see 12 to 10 to 12 for my saturation on this is a fairly common thing for me. And then under blue, you can come in, and can you see the change in the green of the wave as I'm sliding the blue primary?
Yeah.
Okay. If you're in tough situations and you're trying to figure out, or you get as much color, the calibration on Camera Raw or Lightroom, if you're not using it, is a really good place to start, because you might be surprised at some of the information that you can get out of it. So now I've gone in and set calibration. Now I'm going to go back up to my basic panel, and I'll start working with my whites, and I'm going to bring this up. Usually, if it's, I don't want to blow out the whites. I still want to have enough definition. So this one I'm setting should be at 36. I'm going to come into my blacks, and I'm going to bring them down, because you see there is some dark areas in the waves, but also if you see the rock formation to the left, there's some shadow information, there's some shadows there. And I want to make sure that that I have a good spread in my histogram. Although it's not anything pure dark and there was a bright day, I still want to try to create some contrast in this rock area that's over here. Highlights, what's really for me, I don't know how many people do it, but the first thing I'll do is I drag the highlights almost to 0, -100, or very close to that. And as you can see, when you do that, you see how you're now pulling back those highlights and you get to see the definition in the spray in this, and now you start to see some definition or some contrast that's starting to come out in the sky behind it. And that to me is important. Shadows, on this one, I'm going to bring up. And about there. Texture, I'm depending on the wave, sometimes I'll use texture, sometimes I won't, and I will play with these for a certain amount of time, for a little bit. I don't want to over texture them because I get into that later using some other programs. So I will add some texture, usually around 9 or 10. And this one, clarity, a little bit. At about 9 to 10 or 11. And then dehaze is something, I don't know how many of you are using dehaze. It's really great at times, especially out here in the ocean, because with all the wave action, you have a lot of mist and haze that's in the air from the salt spray and all the wave action. So it really makes a difference to be able to bring that out. And so I don't go crazy with it, but as you can see, you can really change that and bring out some of the definition. And so I will oftentimes use a certain amount of dehaze. Vibrance, usually at about 10 or 12, something like that. And then saturation will depend on the individual wave, because some of them with brighter light will already have a certain amount of saturation, where on some that are really flat light, you really have to work at it to bring it out. So after that, if I come in and I'm using detail, I pretty much leave my sharpening, noise reduction, and color noise reduction pretty much at about what it is when it comes to that, way that it's set standard. When it comes to effects, I really don't do much in vignetting, because I will do that later in the workflow. And what I have started doing now a little bit is in color mixer, and start to work with some of that. I hadn't used it previously, but you can come in and you can really, now that you've got the calibration and you work with that, you can come in and you can change your luminance. You can make the greens brighter. You can add, more black to it or more white. You can change the saturation on it. And then you can also go through and pick the colors that you want. And normally what I normally see are the blues, greens, yellows, a little bit of orange. Sometimes you can go in and you can change the hue of those if you want. And so again, I've started working on a little bit of that recently. So I'm going to come back up to here. Now, just to show you where we started, that's where we started, and this is where we're at so far.
Wow.
Neat, moving along.
That's just in camera raw.
Wow.
Okay, so then I'm going to open. And I'm going to ask you to bear with me. I normally don't have all of my tools and panels set here on this monitor, but so that you can see the tools and panels that I use, I've got on here because I have a second monitor, and usually those tools are off on that second monitor. And so you may go, gee, he doesn't know where his tools are. Well, for the last 3-4 years, I've had them on a different monitor, but for this, I'm specifically going back to everything on one screen. So the first thing that I'll do once I open it into Photoshop is I'm going to save it. And I'm going to come up and go, this is beauty. And this is going to be zoom, and I'm going to say number 3. Now, so that you don't have to sit and wait for all of the stuff to save each time, because I save a lot. There's nothing like sitting here and working for a couple of hours on something, and then you get far enough along and something happens or you crash and you haven't saved enough. And so I am going to go and change this to 8-bit mode. You might find in some of the works that I do and some of the stretching and heavy manipulating that it may not look quite as good in an 8-bit. But if I left it in 16, you'd be waiting and waiting for this. It's a fairly fast computer, but you'd still be waiting because of the number of layers that I end up using. So kind of a
Tim?
Yes,
Do you normally work in 16 though?
absolutely, always.
Okay,
I always
So you're
shoot
doing
raw, and I always work in 16-bit.
okay. You're doing 8 for us.
I'm doing 8 for you.
Thank you.
Simply because I don't want you to have to sit and wait. So in this case, I'm going to do a little bit different workflow. I'm going to show you how I oftentimes work with Topaz in some of my images. One of the first things that I do. So the first thing I'm going to do is do a Control J. And if I try to do a lot of keyboard shortcuts when I can. And if somebody goes, oh, what was that again? Because not everybody is the same, you know, using the same programs and that, don't hesitate to say, what did you do? I don't want somebody to go, oh, what did he do? And then have you lost? Trust me, I did that all through school being lost. So I don't want anybody to be lost.
So I want to be sure that I'm seeing the right thing. I see multiple images, but it doesn't look like my Photoshop panel usually would. It's like 5 images and then off to the right. So is it open in Photoshop?
Yes, you see, well, there's 5 panels, tool panels on the right-hand side and 1 image. So do you see the image that's moving around?
No.
No,
No?
no.
Yeah, I don't
No.
either. It
We're
looks like a
seeing your-
file.
Yeah.
Oh,
I
wait a
think
minute.
it's the share screen thing again.
Yeah. Okay. Now can you see?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So
Thank you.
as I said, this is my first time doing Zoom, and so bear
You're
with
doing
me.
great.
If you go, hey, I can't see it, you have to remind me to do a new screen share.
Okay.
So let me go back to this. Can you now see the image that I'm working on?
Mhm.
Okay, so you didn't miss anything. I just came in and I opened it, and the first thing I do, I saved it and created a new name just for tonight. So that's the only thing that I did. So I'm going to duplicate the layer by hitting Control J. Then I double click and I'm going to name this layer. And this is going to be named Studio for Topaz Studio. And I come up and I have under Filter, I have Topaz Studio 2. And I will open it. Can you see this Topaz Studio?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
The image.
Can you see my cursor moving?
yes.
Okay, so then you can see it. So there are three filters in Topaz Studio that I use a lot. And the first one that I always try to use is AI Clear. And AI Clear has a tendency to help reduce noise. If you look close, let me zoom in a little bit. So when I turn the eye on and off, you'll see that there's some graininess to it. And AI Clear does a really good job of smoothing out the noise, and it will also add a bit of sharpness to it. Now, I usually will come in and I will run this first AI Clear at depending on the image, at about 70 to 75% opacity. I don't ever normally use it full on because I don't want it too textured or too sharp, because I have other things that I'm going to do with it. And so I just normally will go in and do it at about 70 to 75% or 65%. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and use what's called precision contrast. And I come down here and there's only 2 settings that I use. I use a micro, and depending on the image, I'll normally come in and do a 0.30, and then I'll do half of that at a 0.15. And if you look at the image, you can see where it adds some contrast to it. Are you able to see that change? That's after. This is before.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, it's subtle, but it's there, and it helps create some contrast. You can especially see it in these areas. And if you're looking at the rocks, as I come through and I'm going to turn it off, and then I'm going to turn it back on, you can see a certain amount of
Yes.
change in it. So again, I'll come down and I'll use that probably at about 70%. 69 to 70%. And then the last one that I do is precision detail. Precision detail is something that you can overuse, and it gets really kind of chunky, and it gets really, really busy. I want to bring out a certain amount of detail, but then I will take detail back away. And so usually I will do an overall, and I don't ever come down here and use it on the small details. For me, small details you'll see when I'm processing in waves, to me, have a tendency to pull your attention away from where you want the viewer's eye to go. So I'm more interested in doing the medium and the larger details on it. And usually I'm doing 0.10. I never use a detail boost. I just come down to the overall large and the overall medium, and I'll come in and do like a 0.10. Now, if you can see, you see a change in some of the detail amount that's before, this is after. Do you see a subtle difference?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to come in again, and I'm going to drop this down to about 60 to 70%. If there are areas that I don't want to have this done, I can come in from each one and I can put a mask on it, and I can paint on this mask for each individual filter to take that away if I think it's too much. But usually by lowering the opacity of each filter to about 65 to 70, I get what I need out of it. So that's it for me for using this. I come up and hit accept, and it carries me back into Photoshop. You can see, come up a little bit, and you can see, you see the overall change in the image?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's what I'll do. Now, once I'm back into Photoshop, as I have learned, sadly, over a period of time, I'm going to save. And this is why I changed it to 8-bit, because once we get into the later parts of these images with lots of layers, it takes much longer to save. So I will normally come in and try and save every time I get done with the step. For this one, the next thing I want to do is I want to take a look at the sky back here. And so I'm going to come in, and I know I want to bring out more of the contrast in the detail in the sky and make a little bit more drama. And so I'm going to use a curves layer simply because I like curves. I've used them ever since I started Photoshop. And I'm going to create a curves layer, and I'm going to change it to luminosity mode. And I'm going to name it, and this is going to be curve for contrast in sky. Does everybody know why you change a layer to luminosity?
No.
Okay, so if you're using curves or if you're using levels and you're doing some heavy manipulation of it, what you'll find is if you have it in normal mode, that you can actually change some of the color of the image. Whereas if you go to luminosity mode, you're just changing the tones, the lights and the darks. You don't end up with a color shift unless you go really way out on the limb with it. But if you're in standard normal mode, you can get a color shift depending on how much you're using or how big that change in the curve is. So I'm going to say, okay, and then I'm going to come up and click on the lighter area here. I'm going to brighten it somewhat. I'm going to come down and click into a darker area here, and I'm going to overdo it. And you can look at it and go, oh my gosh, what is he doing? And this is my normal mode, because then if you're not is everybody familiar working with masks?
Yes.
Okay, and if you're not, say, hey, I'm not. But this allows you to overdo it, and then I will come in and I click on the mask to make it active, and then I just hit Control-I to invert it to black. So if the mask is black, all of the things that you've done on that layer are hidden, and you paint on it with white to show what you've done. If the mask is white, then it reveals what you've done with this curve. So I always go through, change it to black, and then I'll come in and hit B for brush, and I will come in, and I usually work at about a 10% opacity. You can just hit the key 1 real quick and it'll change it to 10, or you can hit 0.5 to go 5%, or if you hit 5, it'll be 50. But I find I like to do it in smaller amounts and build it up. It takes a little more time, but you have more control. Everybody knows, or I'm not trying to make the assumption, but to enlarge my brush, I will use the left and right bracket key. Right bracket key makes it larger, left bracket key makes it smaller. And then my default over here for my brush, my black and white, I'm going to paint with white. You can hit D to make it your default. You can hit X to change it back and forth from black or white. And you just hit the X and that will change it. And so now I'm going to paint with white. And as you start to see,
a question.
Yes.
Do you set the brush softness, hardness?
I'm always at, for this, I'm always at 0 hardness.
0 hard, okay.
0 hardness.
Okay.
There are other times if I'm working in architectural or if I'm doing something really, touchy, I will go in. But usually whenever I brush in a curve or a level or something like that, I'm usually at 0 hardness.
So very soft edge.
Yes, very soft edge. Because I don't want to have, I don't want the viewer to come up and go, oh, look at that hard line. So I can feather it in easier by coming in. And so I'm starting to come in, and sometimes I'll come in along this edge and create a little more contrast. But the premise of this is to see if you look at the upper clouds, you see the before and you see the after. And you can see some of the definition also in the spray of the cloud here as it's brighter. If you decide that it's too much, then you can come up, click back on it, and you can lower the opacity, and you can fine tune it that way. Or you can come in and repaint black onto the mask to reduce it. So I'm just going to drop it down just a little bit. But the main point for me is I wanted to have these clouds having some definition and interest. And the reason is this: I want to have a type of mimicry and a rhythm of these clouds. And if you look at this area down here where the waves are, and if you look at this, and if you look at the areas here in the wave, you will see kind of a rhythm and a mimicry of the dark and white, of the puffiness, of the similar formations. And so I wanted to try and bring something into that and have it a little bit more up in the sky. To me, it helps just tie it in together versus if it's like that, you don't have as much. Does that make sense?
Tim,
Yeah.
with the 3 topaz that you just used, you're focusing on the sky and the foam, or just the sky?
Okay, I'm sorry, say again, Terry.
With the 3 topazes that you put together, you're focusing now on revealing the sky or the sky and foam?
Okay, when I worked with the 3 topaz products, because now I'm just using the straight curves in Photoshop. When I used the 3 topaz products within Topaz Studio, I was dealing more with the wave itself and the rock area through here. I wasn't really dealing with the cloud formation up above because I figured I would do that in Photoshop using curves and a mask.
Thank you.
Right now I'm back in Photoshop just with my standard curves and masks and that.
Gotcha.
Okay, anything else?
What do the Topaz plugins give you that the Photoshop contrast and sharpness features don't give you?
I'm sorry, say again?
I said, what do the Topaz features give you in terms of contrast and sharpness that you can't get from Photoshop?
For some of the precision contrast and for some of the precision detail, it allowed me to go into the small areas and create more contrast in the fine details. That's what I was looking for, because on some of the big things like the contrast in the clouds here and some of the contrast that you'll see in the waves later on, I have different ways of dealing with it. But in dealing with the Topaz and the wave details is the reason that I use the Topaz Studio and those particular 3 filters. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so it's more of a micro adjustment.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what it was. And good question. Okay, so I'm going to save again. And then for this one, I'm going to go into saturation. And I want to try and work on this wave area in through here. And so, and I normally try to label these, because if you have 5, 10, 15 layers and you look at them and go, well, I know it's a curve, but what did it do? And you have a bunch of them stacked up, or you have combined layers, or what we call stamp layers, then you have to start unclicking things to try and figure out what it was that you worked on. So I normally, if I'm not in a rush, I will normally try to take the time to create a label for it. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to, when you're dealing, does everyone know what a targeted adjustment tool is that's in some of the layers that we have?
No.
So if you're able to see my screen, when I have a saturation tool, there's a little device or a little tool right next to the master here. And mine is always on, and it allows you to come up, and it has an eyedropper, but when you click the eyedropper, it will sample and tell you what the color is that you sampled. But the other thing is, if you click and hold it, it becomes a hand, and you can slide it to the right to increase saturation. You can slide it to the left to decrease saturation. And so what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to come in a little bit and bring in some of the saturation of this green. And then I'll also come into the hue, and I'm gonna, let's see, -21. So it's so green right now, I'm gonna pull a little of the green out and make it a little bit more yellow green by changing the hue. And so you can come in, you can see what you can do with the hue, you can bring it over and make it radioactive. But to zero it out, just double click on the hue here, but then I'm trying to bring out a little bit more of a yellow green rather than just the straight emerald green. So let's see, any questions so far? You can see a little bit of before and after, that it makes a little bit of a change on there.
Hi, Tim Reyes. I got in a little bit late. You were shooting about 5.6 or so. What kind of speed and what ISO approximately were you using to get this?
So what I normally do is I will let my ISO float on automatic. Okay. Because of the conditions that you're there, it can be really bright. You can have cloud cover coming in. You can have breaks in weather. You can have torrential rains. You can have mist and fog. And so, and a lot of times you can have it all within a 10-minute period. And so because it is so erratic weather-wise and sunlight-wise, if there's any cloud whatsoever, I'll normally keep my ISO on automatic. And then I normally, if I'm shooting with an extender, then I'm governed by that for my largest f-stop. But normally I try to be within 5.6 to f8 for my f-stop. My shutter speed, I normally will try to do a minimum of 1/1600th of a second. And before I go any farther, you'll see, let me explain one of the reasons I do that. Some people will say, oh, I'm shooting at 1,000th or I'm shooting at 500th of a second because I don't want high ISO noise. Well, the cameras nowadays are really good and there's programs to deal with noise. I don't really deal or worry about noise as much as I want to try and freeze the action. And here's the reason. If I'm shooting at a 1/1600th of a second, if you look at the image, you can see the individual droplets of water. You can see the spray. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean I want all that spray, but where I want it and where I want to see the details in that, it's there because I used a high enough shutter speed. If you use a slow shutter speed, this can kind of be mushy and soft and not well defined. I find it's much easier for me to soften it in post-processing than to get it into post-processing and go, gee, I wish it was sharper or I had, I had more freezing or frozen action. So I will always try to shoot minimum 1/1600th of a second. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Okay. So let me see, where was I? I'm sitting here with hue saturation. So I'm now going to go in and normally you'll see me working with tone, color, and then special effects. As you follow Blake Rudis, it's kind of his mantra. But I'm going to come in and this was one of my first early ones and I'm doing a kind of a rudimentary basic workflow with it to show you that if you have some of the basic tools in Photoshop, that you can do so many of the things and you don't need all of the plugins and you don't need all of the things. I will do some of the plugins that I think are important to me and I'll explain why. But in many of these things, you can do them just with some of the tools in Lightroom and Photoshop. So I'm going to come in and do dodging and burning, meaning I'm going to lighten certain areas and I'm going to darken certain areas. And so, let's see. I'm going to, I'm going to make one change first before I do that. I'm going to come back in. I'm going to use Topaz Simplify before I dodge and burn. And I'll explain in a minute. So does everybody know what a stamp layer is or how to create a combined stamp layer?
No.
Okay, so I'm going to delete this. So you see, I have here 5 layers right now. And I'm going to be working on a program that I have to have what's called pixel bearing layer on it. And it has to have actual pixels to work. And so these 3 layers right here are not pixel bearing, they're adjustment layers. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to combine all 5 of these. And you can go in and you can say layer combine, or the easiest thing that I do is a combination keystroke. And the keystroke, you have to kind of work with a little bit, but it's called Shift, Control, Alt, and E. So with my left hand or whatever hands you want, you hold down the Shift, Control, Alt, and then tap the E key. And that combines those and creates what's called a stamp layer. So all of the information in these 5 layers is now in this particular layer. It does build things up, but it works for me. And so this is going to be Simplify, Topaz Simplify product. I use it on every wave image that I have. And you're going to look at it and go, oh my gosh, what is he doing? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here to go filter, and I'm going to go Topaz Labs instead of Studio. I'm going to use, because I have so many of the Topaz products, but they're listed individually. I go Topaz Labs, I come down and I do Topaz Simplify version 4. Now I'm going to reset it. This is pretty much what you see in my Photoshop. First thing I do is I always come up here to their simplified program or their filter called Buzz Sim, and it basically turns it almost into a watercolor. So all of that detail work you did, all of that wanting to create the minute details and micro details, Amy, that you had asked about, now have just pretty much gone away. So it's just easier. I do Buzz Sim, I hit OK. and it'll process for a couple of seconds. Now, I'm going to turn the eye off, and so you see what was there. Now, one of the things for me is if you look at this left area, and so it hopefully what I'm trying to explain is not just necessarily the tools that I use, it's hopefully the mindset of what I'm trying to look at and what I'm thinking about when I analyze the image. And so you may know that your eye normally goes to the areas of brightest contrast first. Once you go to the areas of brightest contrast, then oftentimes you're going to go into areas of not only contrast, but detail. So if you have a lot of sharp, busy details, your eye has a tendency to want to go to them, and I don't want people stuck on that. And so what I want to do is reduce the amount of detail and busyness so that your eye isn't kind of glazing over and you're not looking at little tiny articles that to me kind of distract from the overall subject, which is this wave. And so that's the reason I use Simplify, is it pretty much takes all of the detail out and turns it almost into a watercolor. I will come down to the bottom of the layers palette and I'll click on the mask icon. Does everybody know that how the mask icon works or where it is?
Not really.
Okay, so at the bottom of the layers palette, you can take any layer in Photoshop. And this is why I like working in Photoshop. You can take any layer and add a mask to it. And the mask allows you to show what you've done, or it allows you to hide what you've done. So right now, remember I said, if you're looking at the white mask, it reveals what I did with the topaz filter. I have clicked on this mask. I'm going to hit Control-I, and it inverts it so that black allows the original image to come through, and all the changes I made in that filter are gone. But if I paint with white, I'm going to hit the B for brush tool. Now I'm going to make my brush smaller. I'm going to paint with white, and I'm going to be at about a 10% opacity. And I'm going to come in, if you look at these areas along the bottom, I'm going to come in and paint with white, and you're going to see that a lot of that detail starts to blend away and starts to fade away. And what I'm trying to do is to create a feeling of flow, but I don't want you to get stuck on it. And so the area up in here, I'll come in and I will soften some of this spray that's here so that you're not looking at these little fine particles of water. I just want you to know that there's a mist in the spray. And so I will come in areas where it's really detailed, like here, and I'll start painting with white to show the effects of that Simplify. The other thing that Simplify does in using the BuzzSim filter or preset, it adds a lot of saturation to it. And so besides coming in and taking away some of these busy detailed areas I don't want you to concentrate on, it's adding some saturation in the areas. And you're starting to see some of the blue from the wave and the water along with the green that starts to show out. So I'm going to click this on and off. This is before, this is after. Do you see a difference?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what I'm trying to do is to minimize some of the detail on here, but still let the colors and the flow move you up towards the wave. Okay, so let's see. Now that I've done that, I'm going to back this out a little bit. And so hopefully you can see I haven't really done much with the main central wave itself, but the areas leading to it, I've reduced the amount of detail in there. And then I'll come back and I'm going to emphasize it with a dodging and burning. So the way that I'm going to dodge and burn for these first couple times, if you don't have some of the Topaz products, or you don't have some of the palettes that I have from Blake Rudis, I'm going to show you how I did it just using regular curves. And so I'm going to add a curve, and I'm going to hold down the Alt key, and this is the curve icon. And I'm going to create a curve, and I'm going to say curve for dodging. And dodging is basically saying lightening. So I'm going to lighten areas with the curve. I'm going to use it for using luminosity again, because I want it to only work on tones and not color. So part of me, what I want to do is I want to highlight some of the areas in white, then I'll come back and I'm going to darken the areas that I want to create a dark. So I'm going to take my eyedropper, and it turns into this targeted adjustment tool again. This time you go up or down, and I'm going to brighten it more than I need. I'm going to come back up to the mask that's here that is on it. I'm going to hit Control I to invert it, and you see that it went away. Now I will come through with my brush again on a soft, and it's set for white, and it's at 10% opacity. And I'm going to come in and start painting. And what I want to do is I want to bring in some of these light areas down here in the wave, because your eye has a tendency to follow light and white, the brighter areas. So I'm going to come in, and I am increasing the brightness here so that it hopefully creates a type of pathway that brings you up into this curl. And so what I want the viewer to do is you start at the lower left corner, and I'm trying to guide you into this wave using these ribbons of white or ribbons of lighter color up into this area with the light wave, and then up into the wave, and then you can come around. You can also come up into the clouds, and then this can bring you back down. And so you can do a circular motion, but I'm trying to make sure that you are coming into the bright areas and following them in. So I will take the lighter areas, and I am brightening them, and I'm just painting on the areas that I want to increase the brightness. So you'll see, and I'll turn this on and off in a little bit. And yes, it's painstaking. You can spend a certain amount of time. You don't necessarily want to do a lot of glasses of wine when you're doing this, but you can come in and you can increase the contrast in these areas and brighten. And I'll come in oftentimes in the clouds. Can everybody see?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to turn this on and off. And again, I'm not doing it as quite as much as I normally would. And I'm overdoing it somewhat so that you can see, because you may go, well, that's too much. And that's totally fine. But as you see the before and you see the after, and you see the paint. Can you see what I want you to do is look at the bottom here and see how these ribbons, and you see the light area that brings you up, and I'm going to brighten a little bit of this.
Really
And so-
guides the eye.
I'm sorry?
effective.
It guides the eye.
Exactly what I'm trying to do. So you're trying to take your viewer, and you want them to go where you want them to go. And that's one of the reasons why I deleted some of the busy details, is I don't want you stuck on the little tiny, minutia details or micro things. And so by doing this, I am able to, again, understand that light areas brings your eye to it. Now, besides that, I still want to create a little more contrast. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to hold down the Alt key, and I'm going to click on the curve adjustment layer again, and I'm going to do a curve for burn. And burn is basically an old darkroom thing that says I'm darkening. Again, I'm going to bring in luminosity as the mode so that I'm not changing the color. I'm just going to change the tone. Then I'm going to come in and pick an area that's kind of somewhat dark. I'm going to click the eyedropper, which then becomes what we call the targeted adjustment tool. You see that it goes up or down. I'm going to drag this down dramatically. Again, more than I need. And then I'm going to click on the mask up here, which is white, and hit Control-I to convert it or to invert it. And now all of that's gone away that I did with the dark. Now I've activated that mask. I'm back in to the brush. I'm going to paint with white again, and I'm going to bring in the darker areas that I want. And one of them is this area in through here. And I'm going to actually do this at a 5% opacity because sometimes it can get to be pretty heavy. And so I'm coming in and I'm creating some contrast in here, and you can probably see it better in the clouds, and you can adjust your brush size. You can make it smaller or lighter. And again, I'm doing this fairly quick. I would take more time. And in some of these areas, I'm going to darken down some of these areas in the water as well. To create more contrast. Some of these areas in through here. And sometimes people are pretty surprised by the amount of work that I do in creating those dark and bright areas. And I'm going to go back to the lighter one for the curves, for the brightening, and come in. So I'm going to come back. I'm going to turn the dodge off and on, and you see that. Now I'm turning off and on the burning, and you can see a bit in the clouds as it's affected. And you see the difference in the dark and light.
Yeah.
Anybody tell me what they see? What does this wave look like?
Phenomenal is the word that comes to
Well,
mind.
It looks like a trout.
It looks like a what?
It looks like a trout, a fish.
Good. Good. Yes.
I saw an elephant.
And that's why this is the eye. Here's the
You to get rid of the eye.
it comes down, and this is the
Very
tail
cool.
as it's jumping out of the water. And that's what's one of the first things I saw a couple of years ago when I started working. And to me, now I can't see anything but a big fish jumping out of the water. So that's the other thing about working and doing things with the waves. You'll see if you go to my website and you look at the waves, there are some of them that to me really have a feeling that you're looking at something and you see a person or an object or something like that. And it's kind of like when we were kids or even adults and we look at clouds and, you know, you may see a rabbit and I see an elephant, but everybody's entitled to what their imagination shows. But it's really great to look at these things because you can see so many different things in a wave, you know, in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now that I've done that, I'm going to save. And then I'm going to come in and again, create another stamp layer, which is Shift, Control, Alt, E. And then I'm going to name this Diffuse. And I'm going to come back over here to my filters, and I'm going to use another topaz, and I'm going to use what's called lens effects, and they don't make lens effects anymore, which I'm bummed about, but I'm going to reset the filter. And then you saw me do all of this work, and then I'm going to come in and do what's called a slight diffusion. And I'm going to say, okay, and I'm going to click this on and off, and enlarge it a little bit. And you see that there's a bit of a softening and a soft, it's almost like when they shot movie starlets through gauze to create a softer effect. And so what I'm doing is I'm just softening this a little bit, and then I'm going to come in and lower the opacity to about 60%. Anywhere from 60 to 65%. And so it's not so pronounced, but it still has a little bit of a softening effect to it. Then I'm going to come in and I'm going to create another stamped layer, and I'm going to name this Clarity. And I'm going to again go back up to Topaz Labs, and I'm going to use their Clarity filter. And let me just get my note. And I'm going to reset. I always reset. Now, on the left-hand side, you have these presets, and you can go through landscape or nature. And as you click on one, let's say nature, you're going to have different presets. And if you just put your cursor over it, you've got a smaller window on the left, and it will show you what it looks like. And as you can see, the change on it. Well, from one that I've done before, excuse me, I'm going into the landscape category, and you come down and you see these, and you can see what happens if you click on one. You can come to another one, but you can also just scroll through. And so I'm using one. Let me come back up here. I'm going to use one that's called Sunny Day, and it's pretty garish at first. And just waiting for it to save. This is the difference. I'm going to zoom out.
And
then
I'm sorry, but which one is this? Topaz
This is Topaz Clarity.
Clarity. Okay.
And it's also in their studio, in Topaz Studio, but I prefer to do this towards the end for the effects, and I can control it easier on one layer. So I'm going to drop this down.
Tim,
Yes.
did you do nature before you did landscape, or just
Yes.
landscape?
And what I'll do is, it doesn't make any difference. I'm just usually going between the category of nature to look at the presets, and then I'm going through landscape. And it's just that for a couple of days, I've used the landscape Sunny Day, and so I know it. But it was basically to show you that you have a choice of different presets.
Gotcha.
And so now what you can see is this is the before, this is the after. I toned it down just simply by lowering the opacity. You can have it way up, which is not what I prefer, but I'll usually come in at about 55 to 60%, and you can see a before and after.
Wow.
Then, so here's where we've started in Photoshop. You saw what it was like with Camera Raw, how flat it was. This is what it started out when we came out of Camera Raw into Photoshop, and this is where we are now. Some of it is over exaggerated because it's harder to show it on Zoom, you know, than it is looking at mine. So you can look at it and go, well, it's pretty garish or it's too saturated. Yes, in some cases it is, but I'm trying to do it so that you can see how you can create an effect or the feeling that you want. And you can reduce the opacity on any of these. I'll sometimes come in, and if I need, I will come in and maybe do a levels adjustment, again, set to luminosity. So I'm affecting the tones and not the color. And I may slide this right or left to change the overall lightness or darkness. And I may come in and either bring the whites over, or I may reduce the whites if I feel like it's a little too much white. And so again, on and off, very subtle, very soft change, but you have the opportunity, and then you can come in and change the opacity if you want it, if you don't want it so harsh. So that's pretty much my workflow on this particular one. Then save it, walk away, have some coffee, open it the next day, and look at it.
I was wondering about that, if you took time.
I'm sorry?
I was wondering if you took time and came back, because that seems like a lot of work, and to just, you might change your mind, I think.
Absolutely. And here's the other reason why I work in layers and why and as a master file, I will normally keep all of the layers. So if I want, I can go back to it and make a change versus some people will do their changes and then flatten it. I don't. So what I would normally do is this is saved. Now, this isn't a full Photoshop format. If I'm going to save it and send it out to the internet or to show it on Facebook or Instagram or send it to somebody as an email or show it on my website, I'm going to save it to a different size and I'm going to sharpen it differently than I would if I'm going to print it. If I'm going to print it, I'm going to keep it at 300 DPI. I'm going to size it differently. I'm going to sharpen it differently. And so I will normally keep the master file, then I will save it for a JPEG use for internet. And I can also save it for a PSD for printing different sizes. And each size that I print, whether it's a 8x10 or this is also in a canvas of a 16x20, that becomes a separate file to be sharpened, for that size. So any questions before I close this one out?
Hey, Tim, I had a question for you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I had an image that I'd entered in competition not too long ago, and I spent a whole hell of a lot of time on it. But I noticed, like, this image, before you even started to work on it, I look and I go, I'm seeing all these highlights because of the direction of the lighting stuff on the wave. And the waves the sky in the background is, appears to be, a little bit darker, which gives it a real nice, contrast between the sky. I'm wondering, for example, the image that I'm talking about, the background, because it's facing from a bit of a different angle, I don't have the benefit of the lighting. It was also a very foggy day. But I'm wondering, do you have any suggestions as far as ways to differentiate the background from the wave itself? I mean,
Yeah.
I played with it a little bit, just going in and doing some lightening and darking in the wave itself, but around the edges of the wave where it got into the sky, it just blended together.
Right.
And they poo-pooed my image, even though people were like, "Oh my God, I thought you were going to win with that image." It's like,
well,
well,
here's
yeah,
the thing. We don't get to choose the wave. I mean, we don't get to choose the conditions when we're there.
Yep.
The first two images that you're going to see are going to be somewhat optimal. The last two images, if you hang around and if we get to them, you will see it is a real struggle because I was shooting in heavy overcast. In one of them, it was pouring rain, and you've got this monochrome sky. And when you see the raw file on it, it's like, can you do anything with it? And so it's more involved, but I also wanted to show you that, yes, you can work in optimum conditions and get some really nice things when you have a bright sky and you have nice fluffy clouds, or you get some contrast. But what can you try and do if you've driven up to Cape Disappointment and you've traveled that distance and you've stayed in a motel and now you've got really just terrible conditions? So I've got a couple of those. I have a few thousand of those, and I'll try to show you what I do. And it takes a lot of work. And sometimes you're going to have a flat sky. There's just sometimes, unless you replace the sky, but it's really hard when you have waves and foam and spray to do a sky replacement. So sometimes I kind of embrace it and create the mood of a somber, deep, troubled water or photo. And you'll see one of those. So sometimes you embrace it.
Got it. All right. Thanks, Tim.
Okay.
Thanks for your help in the past.
My pleasure.
Your work.
Okay, I'm going to try and go back and see now if I can go. I'm going to, you can now see my, my bridge again, correct?
Yes.
Okay. I'm learning. So I'm going to do another one, and this is called the eye. And we're going to go from this, hopefully, to something like this.
Wow.
This one has been a really popular one. I have this in a 5 foot by 3.5 or a 60 by 40 canvas. And it's really stunning. And I've done 3 canvases that size. One is in Pennsylvania. One is not too far from me here in Gig Harbor, and I have one here in my living room. And it's really great to take this one and take a little LED that's mounted on the ceiling when the other lights are out, and just have this white LED small light that shines on it. So let's see if we can replicate. I'm going to open. Now, can you see my screen in Camera Raw?
Yes.
Yes.
Because then when I when I change over to Photoshop, I've got a, new share. Okay, so again, first thing I want to do is I'm going to come in and crop, and my aspect ratio is normally a 4:3. And let me take my notes and get ready for the next one. So I'm going to try and come in. And the thing that you'll find is with these waves, there is a lot of salt spray, and you're going to see a lot of stuff in the background, that all of this in the background is airborne spray. And sometimes it's really hard to deal with. And so you just have to do the best that you can. And sometimes it takes a lot of work. So let's see. Okay, now I'm going to come in and I'm going to make sure that I'm back in Adobe Standard. White balance, I'm going to come in with the eyedropper, and normally I'll try to click on something that I think should be white. And this one I'm going to bring a little bit cooler to about 4350. And then tint, I'm going to put a little bit more green in it. Okay, I'm going to come down to do my optics and make sure that, as you can see, it changes a little bit from the lens that was being used. So I always will try to go in and at least do my lens profile for lens correction on that. I'm going to come back again to calibration. And on this, I'm going to pull the shadows down to about -6. And then in the red, I'm going to take the red primary, and you can see there's real subtle differences on it, but I'm going to bring it down to about -17 to 18. And then I'm going to bump the saturation up to about 16. When it comes to the calibration, they're really subtle changes. And sometimes you may not see them on a Zoom or when you can't see, my screen. And that's unfortunately sometimes how it is. And sometimes it's really hard to see anyway. So the green I'm taking to a +12, and then saturation wise, I'm bumping it up to 12. And then for the blue, I'm going to come in at a +10, and saturation is going to be 16. Now it's going to be real subtle. But there is a little bit of a difference in there. And I'm trying to pull out, what happens with these is the sun is behind you. And so certain times of the day, the sun is almost directly behind the wave, and it works for great silhouettes, but it's really hard sometimes to pull color out because it's a backlit situation. So I'm trying to do as much as I can to get the greens and the blues to come forth, with this. So after that, I'm gonna go back up into the basic panel. I'm gonna bump my exposure up a little bit. And whites. Check, make sure I'm not blowing out. And bring down the blacks. There's a lot of black in here with the rocks, and so I'm going to pull this down quite a bit. Highlights again, I'm going to bring those way down so that you start to get some definition. Whoops, not that. Let's try highlights. Wrong one. Okay, about 75, 76. Shadows, I'm going to increase a little bit. Oh, fair amount. And texture, I'm going to leave as it is. Clarity, I'm going to go up to about 10. Dehaze again. And you can see what dehaze does. You can see, you can go way too far with it, but it really does, it works especially with these waves because of all of the haze and the atmospheric conditions that you have. Vibrance, I'm going to try and squeeze out with the blues and the greens. So I'm going to bring this up a bit to about 27. I'm going to leave the saturation the way that it is. As far as detail, I'm going to leave that. And I can come into, I'm going to try the color mixer a little bit. And I want to try to pull a little more out of the greens and blues. And so I'm bringing these up a little bit, not horrendously. One of the things I really am trying to do is to bring out this green, and I will do that in a little bit later, but I'm trying to bring out that, and it's a combination. Does everybody you know that if you're dealing with like fall colors or grass, when you think it's green, it's actually yellow. So if you've ever clicked on green grass to get a color sample on it and you go yellow, so in trees and grass, there's a lot more yellow than what your eye tells you. And so it's the same thing here. I'm pulling up the yellows just because there is some yellow in the water along with the green. Mm-hmm. So I'm pretty much done in camera raw. This is where we started. This is where we're at now. So hopefully a bit of a difference. And then I'm going to open. And I know I need to do a new screen share. Can you see the image now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Let me. So I guess this dog can learn one trick. Okay. So what I'm going to do again is duplicate this. I'm going to go back into Studio. And I don't do it this way for everyone. These are the first ones that I did. And I've changed a little bit, but I still use Topaz Studio. I may have changed the order a little bit, but I still do it. So I'm going to go through these a little bit quicker so you don't have to waste time or have something repetition. So I've gone in and I added AI Clear, which is their artificial intelligence that they call it, and it smooths it out and also adds some detail. So you can see what's happened here. If you look closely, you can see where it's a little bit softer. There's some fuzziness and some noise in that smooth area in the background. And when you do AI clear, it smooths it out, but yet brings some of the detail back here. And I have put it to about 72% opacity. Then I'm going to come back up. I'm going to use precision contrast. And I'm going to use for the micro, I'm going to use 0.40. And then I come down to what we call the low, and I'm doing half of that. I normally, between the micro and low, if I'm at 30 for micro, I'll do low at 15 or 40 and 30. I usually try to split it. Don't ask me why. I just followed it one time and I went, oh, that seems to work. Now, you're going to look at this and go, wow, this has got a lot of contrast in it. It does. But remember, I'm going to deal with part of that when I get into Topaz Simplify. But I want to have some of that structure here to be able to work with. And so now I'm into detail, and my overall, I'm going to be at 0.08, and large is 0.08. And then highlights, I'm going to add a little bit to 0.08. Okay, and that's going to look really crunchy. But again, I'm going to drop this down. And it takes a fair amount of that out. I can also add a mask right here for precision detail. And if I feel that it's too much, I can come in with a mask and I can paint some of that detail out. And I can do it for each layer. Now, I'm not going to do much of it here because, again, I'm going to do it, and I prefer to do it in Topaz Simplify. So I'm just going to accept this as it is. Now, next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to save. And I'm going to do tree just so it has a different name. I want to add some contrast in the sky and darken that. So I'm going to come up here and holding down the Alt key, I'm going to click on the curve adjustment tool, change it to luminosity and say okay. And I'm going to drag this down. And I actually have some numbers for the lower point. 124, 93. And 161. Okay, and you can see it's pretty gnarly. But what I'm looking at is I'm trying to look at this area back here and this rock area. I'm not necessarily looking at here because I'm trying to do this for the sky. So I'm going to say, or for the background, because it's not the sky, it's rocks. So curve for a background. And then I'm going to hit Control E, Control I on the mask. And then I can come in with the brush. And again, I'm in normally 10% mode, and I'm going to paint in white. I'm going to make this a little bit smaller so I can come in, and I'm coming in and I want to change to make the sky or the background. This is all rock background. This is a big cliff. And so I'm trying to come in and darken this so that you don't have, your eye has a tendency to go to things of brighter contrast, and I don't want anything to compete with the waves. So I'm trying to come in, and I'm doing this quickly. I would spend more time, you know, if it was, I'm doing it for production, which I did, you know, earlier. But as you can see, it makes a difference on there. Now, it also introduced a certain amount of, even though I'm in luminosity, for me, I can see a bit of a green tint or an aqua tint on the rock background. I don't know if you can see it, but I will come in and I'm going to change and put in a desaturation to desaturate that color in the background in just a minute. Then before I do that, I'm going to come in and I want to lighten some of the area in the wave here. So I'm going to add another curve. Whoops. Luminosity. Curve to lighten the wave.
So you're using a vector mask?
I'm sorry?
You're using a vector mask?
No, I'm using, well, you know what I did? Let me just say, okay, and then this mask, this one needs to go away.
Okay.
I actually hit, yeah, sorry. As I said, my tools are normally in another location. And so sometimes it's like, oh, I hit the wrong key because my tool.
Oh, I hit things wrong all the time.
Yes. So now I'm going to lighten the wave. And so what I'm going to do is click on the curve. I've got my targeted adjustment tool right here that is activated. And I'm going to brighten this up considerably. Again, hitting Control I so that it darkens. And then I can come in with the brush on a fairly low opacity and paint with white. And I can come through and I can increase, and I want to lighten some of this area in the center here, which was so dark. And then some of these areas down in through here, which I will again darken later, but I'm trying to create some areas. And so as you can see, it doesn't take a lot, and I work in low opacities rather than a high opacity, and then you have to come back through and change it. So this is how I'm working. And you can see part of the change that way. So now I'm going to go in and I'm going to simplify this now. So I'm creating a stamped layer, again, Shift, Control, Alt, E. I'm labeling it as Simplify. Then I'm going to come over and click on Topaz Labs, come down to Simplify 4. The thing you'll find with Topaz Labs products, if you have them open during the same session with a computer on or the same Photoshop session, you're going to find that they have what's called sticky settings. So whatever you used the previous setting, it's going to revert to that, which in this case was fine. But if you're doing something different, you want to come in and reset. Excuse me. So again, I'm going to hit Buzz Sim, and then I'm going to say, okay. I kind of like the way Buzz Sim does these things because to me, it looks like a nice watercolor. But it also adds a fair amount of saturation, which I can deal with when I am, oh, I know what I need to do. I need to change this 8-bit. It's taking a bit long. So as soon as I'm done with it, somebody remind me, change it to 8-bit. Okay, hopefully it'll go a little quicker now. So I'm going to add a mask. I'm going to click on it and then hit Control I to convert it or to invert it. And then I'm going to come in again with the brush on white at an opacity of about 10. And I'm going to enlarge this a little bit. And you see the detailed, all the details that are down in through this area and in here. I really want to try and smooth that out and have part of that go away. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and I'm applying painting with white because I want it to be applied there and not necessarily over the entire image. A few areas that are really kind of too many fine details. It almost looks sandy. You'll come in and some of the spray here, to me, has got too much detail, some of the area back in through here. And so I come in on these areas to basically just soften those. You still know that there's a spray, but your eye isn't necessarily trying to focus on every little droplet when I want your eye to focus on some of these bigger areas that are in through here. So I may come in and just lightly take a little bit of detail out. But mainly it's in this area here. And you'll find if you go, anytime when you get wind, the wind is going to set up little ripples in the water, and you're going to get, possibly if you have bright sunlight, you're going to have specular highlights that'll just drive your eye crazy. And so that's what I try to do here, is take some of that away. So I'm going to turn this on and off, and you see the difference? It creates a bit of a more painterly effect, and that's what I try to do. I guess I should point out here and now, for those of you that might not have caught on, I am not a documentary photographer. And so I have no problem modifying things for what I am trying to create. Not necessarily, was it in reality? Well, it's reality for me. And it's the image, or it's the feeling that I try to create, hopefully with the viewer.
Bravo.
Do you ever take it down to the topaz layer, like 100%? Or is it always a modification?
I'm sorry, can you say again?
Do you ever take your mask, with your mask, take it down to the topaz layer so that it's like 100%?
You mean down to this layer here?
No, the topaz that you brought up and you were working with the inverted mask.
Now, are you talking about Studio or the Simplify?
The Simplify.
Okay.
Do you ever use 100% on your brush and take it clear down to?
I don't. I can't remember the last time, because to me, you're having to suffer through me with my 10%, because I don't ever, because if you take it, if I want 100% of the application, so let me go in and hit 0. So my brush is at 100%. Now it takes all of that detail out, and I don't want it all out.
Okay.
Is that
That's what I was wondering.
Is that what you were wondering?
It is.
Okay, no.
If there was any point in it.
If I wanted to create the feeling of a strict watercolor, like when you first saw me change it to Simplify, yes, I like that, but I don't want it too much. And so I will, and it depends on which wave. Some I will do more than others, and some of them I have to do more than others because of the conditions of the wind and the sun. So each wave is a little bit different as to how much I put on it. Whoops, that was painting on there. So, oh yeah, I need to go back to 10%. Okay, so now that I've got that done, I'm going to come in and I want to try a little saturation. And again, each wave is different. Some may need it, some may not. So on this one, I've got saturation, and I'm going to try and label it sat for green and yellow. And I'm going to control save. Okay. Let's see. So normally, the target adjustment tool previously really wanted to go to yellow on this. I don't know why, but I'm going to work on it a little bit and see if I'm trying to work in this area right in through here. And I really want to try and increase this area here. And then I'll mask out some of it. There's a real subtle change in that. I don't know if you can see it, but let me zoom in. Can you see a real subtle change in the amount of green that's coming through in this area right in here? you may not be able to see it much depending on how your zoom is, but I can see it on mine. And that to me is a really important part of the wave, especially if you have it printed in the way that the light hits it. So I have come in and changed that. And I'm basically did away with the change. I made the mask black, and I'm going to use a brush, and I'm going to come in and concentrate. I'm going to go up to 20% on this one, just to make it a little faster. And I'm going to paint into this area here in the wave to try and bring out a little bit more of that green emerald in some of this. So I'm exaggerating it so that you can see it on your screen. You see a little bit of a difference there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's part of it because it really looks nice once you get some light on it. Okay. So now I'm going to go back in and do a dodge and burn. And so let's see. I'm going to click on curve tool. I hold down the Alt key, so I have a dialog box. I'm selecting luminosity, and this is going to be curve to dodge. If I can spell today. Then I'm going to come in and just grab a spot and brighten it a bunch. And the reason I do it is it's much easier because I can build it up with a low opacity brush just by overdoing it. And when I go in and say, okay, I've changed it to the black, everything's gone away. Now I'm at the brush. I'm going to do probably a 5% opacity on it because I raised it so high. And then again, I'm painting with white, and I'm going to come in and just start increasing these areas that are normally light in the wave. Let me see. Let's see that it's working. Okay, I'm going to go to 10% so it goes a little faster for you. And I'm coming down again, and you see these ribbons of color. What I'm trying to do is create a pathway for you to come in and get to the part of the wave that I want you to see. And so all of these little areas that are already have some light area to them, I'm going to try and bump up, and then I'll come back and create some contrast with the areas that have got darks to them. And I would spend a lot more time on this. Again, if I was doing it. So do you see the difference? That's after, that's before. You can hopefully see it down in these areas here where the lighter areas, and it's a natural flow that brings you from the lower left and carries you hopefully up. And then you have all of the light area that's bringing you into this. I'm going to increase a little bit here to try and get you to come up through this area with some of the lighter path. And then you can circle back down around, and you can just keep going around. So now I'm going to, again, come in. I'm going to create a burn layer. Alt and click on the curve tool, name it curve for burn and its luminosity. I'm going to grab an area here, and I'm going to drag it way down. Go to the mask and hit Control I. I'm already at 10%. I'm going to go probably 5 because darkening it goes a little bit faster, I think. And then I'm going to come in and start darkening and creating a little more contrast in some of these areas. I want a little more definition between these lines so that it's not just one consistent tone or color. And you can see in some of these areas, let me go to 10 just to get it going a little quicker. A little bit in through here. So you see a subtle difference. You see a little bit of coloration difference or tones here, and then also in this area of the wave. And what I'm trying to do is to create just some contrast between the light and the dark. And again, it's probably exaggerated, but I'm trying to do that to let you know how you can sculpt with color to create. So it's not just this bland one tone that's along the bottom or in there. You want to create, you know, a certain amount of interest and contrast. That I'm going to come back in and I want to saturate the green again a little bit. So I come in with a saturation tool. I clicked with the eyedropper here in the green, and I'm going to crank this up a bit for saturation to kind of over exaggerate it. Now you can really see how the green in the center in this band of green and back in here and in here is really jumping out, probably more than what you would need. But again, I can come in and hide that by hitting Control I and then brush in. Now I can brush in and create as much as I want in a very localized area. This is kind of what Ansel Adams did when he dodged and burned. He worked in local adjustments. And that's why I work like a lot of people. You can do it in Lightroom with the adjustment tool or with the adjustment brush. It's just I've been doing it so long in Photoshop that this is what's comfortable for me, and I feel I have more control over it. So a little bit of a subtle change in there, just a little bit more green, emerald green, because that to me is the blue and the green is what to me makes the wave. Then we're almost done. I'm going to come in. The last two steps are pretty much always, if I can type anymore, I'm going to go into Topaz Labs, going back to Lens Effects. I'm going to hit Reset, and I'm going to do Slight Diffusion, say OK, and I'm going to come up to the opacity, and I'm going to drop this down to about 65 or so %. And then I'm going to add a mask to this, and I'm going to paint with black. I'm sorry, I'm going to, let's see. Yeah, I'm going to paint with black because I want to hide. So I'm going to hit X to change from white to black on my colors. And I'm going to paint with black in this area because I don't want part of this to be diffused. I want to have a certain amount more detail in this than what I have on other parts of the wave, because this to me is kind of a key area. And so while I have it diffused, I have come in and I have softened that diffusion a bit and taken some of it away in the eye of this wave. And it's just personal preference. So I'm going to save real quick. And then Shift Alt Control E to create another combination or stamp layer. And this is going to be clarity. And let's see, I'm back to the same one. I will use clarity. And for sake of time, rather than go through all the different presets, I'm going to show you the one that I did. And it was, let's see, Sunny Day. I'm going to say, okay. I love working with some of the Topaz products. It's just my personal preference. And again, this is gaudy at first, but it does create an effect that I want. And then I'll bring this down And you can see a little bit of different, you can see a bit of difference. It makes it pop, it brings it out. Now, one of the last things that I would do is I would come in and do a black and white layer. And I want to take, well, let's do it differently. I'm going to come in and try with it. I want to remove the saturation on that back wall, take a lot of that saturation or that green that was there. And so I'm going to come in with a brush. I change the mask to black to hide it. Now I'm going to come in and I'm going to go at a high opacity just for this to work. Make it white. And I'm going to paint that green tint that has been there and try to get a lot of that out and turn it more monochrome or black and, you know, more of a black along this area. And I probably would come in and darken it again, but I won't do that. I'm just going to spare you some time because it's been what? Oh my gosh, it's been 2 hours. So do you see the difference in color tint on the back wall?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So again, this one I would save. And if I was going to print it, I would save it as a different size. If I'm going into the internet, I would change it to a JPEG with a different color space, sRGB, and it would be at a 72 resolution, and I would sharpen them differently. So any questions so far?
Do you ever use vignettes?
Oh, yes, all the time. So here's easiest way that I have done with a vignette. I'm using some of Blake Rudis's tools. And you see, he's got a vignette, a quick, easy vignette. And another thing I've started doing, well, I do this on almost all the waves, but I also use a diamond gradient or his radial spot. And you see this, and I can change this to, let's say, 75. What I'm trying to do here is, this is a radial spot, and I can do it with a diamond gradient, and then I can lower the opacity. I can also change the size of it. But you see what that does?
Yeah, that was the part of the image that was unresolved for me.
Well, is it resolved now? Kind of.
I like it better.
Yes. And so, and again, I have found on almost all of my images now, and I've got 2 other ones if we get time or if you want, and one of them has to have a spot in it because it is so dark and because the light was so bad that I really had to have something in there to create a spotlight. And because there was an entrance into a portal, so to speak. And yes, I use diamond gradients or that radial spot on almost every wave where I can find a highlight to work with. So, yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
What was that tool you just used? It says 7SE7.
So this is Zone System 7. And I also have palette effects, and I also have a dodge and burn tool that I use a lot. I use this now as my preference in dodging and burning. And it's items from Blake Rudis that I have gotten. And he has some phenomenal tools that you can get from him. But yes, you can come in and do the learning curve. You've got hours and hours and hours of videos to go through to learn how to use them, which I have to go through again. But there are some of them I use his dodge and burn almost religiously now. I used a different method for you because not everybody has this, and I figured using curves for dodging and burning would be the easy way to do it. Because
Tim, could you send us an email with some of the other tools that you use like this?
Yeah.
And the Academy, when I tried getting it on my own iPhone, I got a Stairmaster, a treadmill.
Yes, I'll get a message to Betsy and Bill, and I'll send a link to F64 Academy. And I would highly suggest signing up because he does a lot of free things every week.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to close this. It's 8:41. I hope you're not bored to tears. I thought
My
I
God,
was
no.
gonna be short on images.
Oh, this is awesome.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, say again.
awesome.
So you tell me how long you want this to go. Do you have questions and answer questions?
I have a question. I have a question, Tim.
Yes.
So you had mentioned earlier that you had printed something out like 5 foot by something.
Yes.
And I was looking at the pixel size of your print. And I was kind of wondering how you printed something that big, but while we were talking, I downloaded the Topaz. And they have a tool that enhances the image detail by up to 600% for printing. I mean, I was kind of wondering if those two are related. How do you print something that large with, I think it was 6,400 pixels by...
So there's a couple of new tools. Photoshop has come out. Photoshop and Lightroom have come up with their new Enhance that is available in Camera Raw or Lightroom. And in Camera Raw, it's called Super Enhance. And in Lightroom, I don't know, but it's, I think, similar. And it doubles the pixel size. So after you crop, you can right mouse click on in Camera Raw, and you can say Super Enhance, and it will double the image size, which allows you then to get bigger prints. I used for that 5 foot by the 60 by 40, I used Topaz Gigapixel AI or AI Gigapixel to increase. Now, the nice thing about is these are 60 inches by 40 inch canvases. And so a canvas you can get by with much less resolution because of the texture than if you're printing on paper or metal. And so if I'm printing my own stuff here at home and for someone and it's on paper, I'm going to print it at 300 DPI or PPI, and sometimes people will go 240. When you do a large canvas, you can get by at 150, 200 max, and oftentimes you're at their maximum file size for transfer. But you can get by with a lot less resolution on a canvas, and that's what these three were, a 60 by 40 canvas. And I used Gigapixel AI to enlarge it, and then saved it as a 150 or 175 per inch. And it was amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's the first email I got from Topaz was that tool. So thank you. That's very interesting.
Yeah. The lady in Pennsylvania loves it. So it turned out.
I bet she does. Yeah.
So you tell me what you want to do, because
I'll tell you that I have totally enjoyed this. It's been fantastic. I've learned so much, and I don't think I can absorb anymore. I think I'm kind of done.
Okay.
Can we get you back, Tim?
That all depends. It has been because I still work, still have a full, a daytime job. I'm kind of semi-retired, but I'm still trying to photograph quite a bit. So it all depends. But I will get the two PDFs for my worksheet out, and I'll send it, and then I will send some information regarding Blake and his F64 Academy.
Great.
And there's a lot of things. There's a lot of things. And again, mine is not the only way or the right way. It's just that what I've been using and it works for me. You can use, if anybody's heard or knows of Matt Kloskowski.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, he's great.
You have LB1 training. All of them are phenomenal resources. They know far more than I do. This just is something that works for me.
You are so humble. We're amazed.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Tim, very much.
Anybody have any questions before?
What are your favorite cookies?
Chocolate chip.
Whole House chocolate chip.
All right.
Okay, so in all of this information, you have to send us your address.
Yes.
There you go.
Okay, okay. And if anybody is making the trip, if anybody's making the trip up to Cape Disappointment, you've got Betsy and Terry and Bill have my email address. They've got my phone number. If you're going, don't hesitate to call. If I can't make it, that's one thing. If I can, I'll certainly be happy to be there. And if I can give you any advice on it, that's, that would be great.
And likewise, Tim, if you're ever down in this area, you know where you can find a place to stay.
Okay, well, I appreciate it very much. I'm sorry we didn't get to other images. There were 2 other ones. But I hope that you got a chance to see how I work and what I do with my wave images. I hope it wasn't boring to you.
No, it
Fantastic.
was very good.
Fantastic.
Very good.
Wonderful.
Absolutely. Well, you always have to
Great
save
job.
something for next time, right, Tim?
Yeah.
Well, if Steve, I think it was Steve asked me about one where he had a sky that he just couldn't work with. Give Steve my email. I'll be happy to send him just a JPEG copy of my raw image copied, and I'll show him the final to kind of show what you can do. Because it is one of the ones I was going to try and show tonight, but it was really, really bad conditions, and I was hopefully able to pull something up. So you
Very
can do
generous.
it. It
Thank
takes a
you.
lot of time.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you
very much,
so
Tim.
much.
Hey, Tim, thank you
Thank
very
you.
much for agreeing to do this.
My pleasure. Thanks for putting up with my my first attempt.
Are you
Oh,
kidding?
That was
Great.
great.
You
Very
ate
good.
job.
Anytime.
All right, you have a great night.
better.